Hi, I'm Kate Jinx, a programmer for the Melbourne International Film Festival, and I'm delighted to be talking today to Josephine Decker, the director of Shirley.
Hi, thank you so much, Kate, for having me, and thank you to all of you in the audience. I'm so grateful to be here and to be sharing our film with you. Appreciate you watching it.
Well, we'll get straight into it. Shirley Jackson is just such a fascinating woman. What was it about her that really interested you in telling her story?
Well, I came to this, the script had already been written, so I actually pitched on the project. So I was pitching to Sarah Gubbins, the writer of the script, who had adapted it from this novel called Shirley, which is a fictional novel inspired by Shirley Jackson's life. So we're sort of like many degrees removed from reality, I guess you could say. But what I think so many things about her real life are incredibly inspiring. She was a real revolutionary. I mean, the way that she lived at the time, she was the breadwinner of her family. Her writing was her living, her family's living. And I think she kind of innovated in a bunch of ways. Also, she actually, ironically, and this is not mentioned in our film, but she was making a living at the time. Like one of the biggest selling works that she was selling was these comedy stories about raising her kids and sort of being like I think she like being a mom who does not necessarily have it all together and isn't a perfect. And there was so much imagery. Our film is set in 1948. There's so much imagery at the time of like that, like perfect housewife, and she was always kind of subverting that, I guess. And, but I think what really drew me to her more than anything was her storytelling and her stories and her writing, which was so stunning. And we really worked hard to make the film feel like you were entering a Shirley Jackson story more than getting like caught up in her biography. We were really like, how can we make it feel like you are in a Shirley Jackson tale? And we tried to do that, thematically and sensorially and in the way that she kind of moves from a third person experience into a very subjective experience that's happening in the mind. We tried to do stuff like that too. So it was a exciting, challenge.
Yeah, well, you mentioned that you worked with Sarah Gubbins, who is a screenwriter based on a fictionalized version of Shirley's life. Often your work has a lot of collaborative elements, but how was it working with a screenwriter in this case? Did it sort of change the way you thought about making a film?
My first three features I wrote them all or developed them with actors. So the ultimate screenplay was something I wrote, and although I always improvised a lot with actors, but so this was the first one I worked on with a screenwriter, and it was a very different process. I mean, it's so exciting actually to get to work on something where you get to explore someone else's vision, and super challenging in some ways because there's a lot of dialogue in the film, and my films tend to be very imagistic and gestural and physical, and so I think it was exciting the way that we tried to really stage the dialogue in a way that was very movement and dance oriented, and so there was a lot of like working through the blocking with the actors. I don't like to block in advance on my own. I think it's really important that the actors are part of the decision-making process about blocking so that their instincts and choices can guide the choices that we make with the camera and so on. So, but just overall, very different, I think. And what a learning experience. What a beautiful project to get to learn on. I had so much terrific support. We had the best producers like in the world. We had a great partner team financing team at Los Angeles Media Fund. And we also worked with Sue Nagel, who now runs Annapurna. Sarah, our writer, was a producer, and we had Killer Films on board with Christine Vachon and David Hinojosa, and I think there's a reason that they are, like legends. So they're just really great at facilitating your artist's vision. So I feel blessed.
Yeah, I mean, they are legendary names. I was going to mention that. And you also had Martin Scorsese executive producing as well. I mean, you have a lot of incredible people attached to this film. And I know that collaboration is really important to you. And you actually have a background in experimental theatre, which I find very fascinating. Can you talk a little bit about how you bring that into working with your actors? So you've mentioned sort of not blocking without them, but do you bring things from that world into like the rehearsal process, for instance?
Yeah, I think so. We didn't have much rehearsal ahead of the shoot in Shirley. We only had about a day and a half. It was so short. My goodness, it was short. But one of the first exercises I did was an exercise from it's a kind of a viewpoints technique. It's something I learned when I was in physical theater school, where you really limit the actor's vocabulary. So you just had I had our four leads, you know, Michael Stuhlbarg, Elizabeth Moss, Odessa Young, and Logan Lerman, just stand against a wall, and then the only thing that they're allowed to do is walk forwards and backwards. So they have to make a piece, create a piece, and they can only walk forward and backwards. They have very neutral expressions. And I think what happens is that because the only thing that makes that piece interesting is tuning into the other bodies in the space and really connecting with those other bodies and using that kind of sixth sense, because they have to keep their eyes straight forward to kind of connect. And so it's really about acting beyond yourself. It's about responding and moving with the other people in the room. And so we did a few weird kind of exercises like that, which is so nerve-wracking to do that with super experienced actors like Elizabeth Moss and Michael Stuhlbarg, who you're just going to think this is crazy, you know, but I think they were into it. And we did a few character exercises also that day that I mostly was like trying things out from I have the Viewpoints book, which I was tried a few things out from. And then, but you know, I think the other thing that showed up a little bit on set was Sarah Gubbins, our writer, had worked with Andrea Arnold, and they do silent takes a lot. And that's something that I had kind of discovered on I can't remember which film we ended up trying a few things and doing silent takes, but it was really effective sometimes because the writing is so strong. I mean, Sarah wrote such a great script that actually the dialogue has such a pathway that you can actually take the dialogue away pretty easily. And then there's so much going on in the actors' glances and looks and movement through a room and the ways that they touch each other. And so we tried a few scenes. We would do silent takes as the first take. And that was really effective. And it was exciting to see how people, and that's something Andrea Arnold does, I guess, as a kind of she always does a silent take to start out. And I think it's actually really brilliant because then you ground in the physicality of the scene and maybe learn what you do or don't need to do, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, well, the actors all really live in their characters in your films, and particularly in this one. You worked with Elizabeth Moss, who is so perfect for this role, and she brings so much kind of ferociousness and playfulness to Shirley. Did you always have her in mind for this particular film?
Yeah, we actually, I think pretty immediately when we were talking about like who should we go out to for Shirley, we thought of her. And I mean, she signed up like instantly. It was so exciting to get her so fast and to feel like, you know, we all got our first choice. Yeah, and she's wonderful. I mean, she just has her instincts are so good, and she can do so much, like such subtlety. Like she can just stay perfectly still, and then like there's like a whole like wilderness and galaxy that like explodes out of her eyes. And it's perfect for Shirley because I think early on in our rehearsal process, she said, I don't think Shirley moves very much. And I think that was something that she was discovering, that her physicality is very grounded, but then her mind, her eyes, her, you know, her spirit goes so many places. And it was amazing to see her manifest that, because that's not an easy thing to do. And I think she really has a gift in that way.
I particularly enjoyed the power struggles between Elizabeth Moss as Shirley and Odessa Young in this film. They're constantly kind of wrestling this hierarchy of power from each other. Could you talk a little bit about what power sort of means to you in your films and what you wanted to kind of get across with those scenes?
Yeah, I mean, it was a lot of the power struggle. It's interesting. A lot of it obviously was written into the script, and so it was just fun to get to play with that. And and then actually we did rearrange things a little bit in the edit so that we would bring out Shirley's kind of unpredictable nature. And uh, yeah, because it did enhance the power struggle. It's sort of like if you can't tell what Shirley's going to do next, then how do you make, you know, how do you be Rose? Like, how can you function or feel safe when any moment this woman is just going to blow up at you and throw you out of her house, or, you know, out of her living room. So I think there's something, yeah, it was exciting to work with their power struggle, and then to see how they really, you know, that at some point they go from such a strong power dynamic of like, you know, you're helping in my house, to really Shirley wanting to include Rose and to learn from her, and really being peers in the process, and at times Rose really shoring up Shirley. At the end of the film, there's a scene that takes place on the cliff. We actually really it was funny because for some reason when we first started shooting that scene, it didn't work, and we were like, oh my God, this is the climax of the film. We have like 40 extra people all like rigging everyone to these like harnesses, and we're like, why doesn't the scene work? And it's the scene where Shirley has to approach Rose from behind and on the cliff, and she's sort of supposed to like stand like 8 feet back from Rose and kind of call to her. And I, like, Sarah Gubbins came running down, and she was like, do I need to rewrite it? And I was like, no, I just need to figure it out. And the cameraman was like, are we shooting it wrong? And I was like running in and out of the forest so I could like get into Shirley's head. And then Lizzie was like, is it something I'm doing? You know, and I was like, no, you know, we're just, there's something about the scene that isn't clicking. And she said, you know, I have this strong instinct to stand next to her. That Elizabeth Moss was like, I was thinking my instinct is to stand next to Rose. And so, and I remember getting chills when she said that. And then we were like, let's do that. And so then she does like come up right next to her. And I just feel like there's something so powerful about ending the film with the two side by side on the edge of that cliff, and that you feel that they've come all this way, and that like they're going to stare at that abyss together, and that there's that thing that women do for each other as much as you can tear each other down. Like, that image really resonated for me. And I think that is a climax of their power struggle in a lot of ways, that they go to that precipice together.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Do you always sort of allow for those things to happen on set? Like, are you very conscious of the fact that your actors might bring something to the film that you hadn't thought of before?
Yeah, I love it when that happens. And I think it's so important. I remember, I mean, my first DP, Ashley Connor, really taught me that. She would just say, like, she would say, you don't need like $1 million to make a movie. You just need to be alive to what's happening around you, and like to capture the magic that's already unfolding, you know? And I think a lot of that is like being aware of like what's happening in your surroundings. Is there something magical that you can, like in that first short film that I shot with her, it was this guy, we were shooting it in Central Park. It was about this tiny pirate girl who's like trying to take over Manhattan. This is one of my first short films, called Me the Terrible. And this guy, we needed to stage like part of a chase scene, and this guy had those giant bubbles, like when you have it's like a hula hoop size thing and you blow bubbles, and he was just blowing these like, you know, human sized bubbles into the air. And so we staged the beginning of the chase like in front of this bubbles guy. And yeah, and it just taught me like always be aware. And I come from a documentary background, so I really always more interested in that kind of authenticity and finding something in the moment and really responding to the actors' instincts. The actors are living the character. I love building with actors, and I think they're such writers. They're such terrific writers. So I love improvising at times, or improvising physicality and really discovering with them. Yeah.
And how much of that changes in the kind of editing or post-production process for you? I imagine that you would have kind of many different kinds of takes within your films, and if you're allowing actors to do lots of different things and kind of being alive to the moment, what changes for you in that when you go to kind of put the finished film together?
So it changes a lot. So I've worked with this same editor for a while. He's been a part of pretty much all my projects in some capacity. His name's David Barker, and he's a real genius. He actually he kind of studied with Godard's editor. So he's just got like out of this world instincts in terms of how to make the like cinematic poetry have a structure and a logic to it. And he really, I mean, he can rewrite a whole film in an edit. I mean, he can just turn it into whatever he wants. It's that's almost dangerous. It's like you got to like keep some of the original pieces. But yeah, I mean, he really taught me that anything is possible. You can make almost any movie out of the material that you have, and it's sort of like paying attention to the footage and feeling out what does the story need, what do you have, what do you feel like the film wants to have. Yeah, we do a lot of kind of like revising in the edit and discovering and trying to forge up characters and you know, I try not to overuse ADR, but we do at times use a lot of ADR if there's things that we wanted to try. And actually it was his idea in our film, the writing process, Shirley's writing process. Interestingly enough, like in the script, the Paula character was fairly clear, but then when we got into the writing, when we got into the editing process, we realized that Paula needed a little like shoring up. And so we ended up we also realized that we didn't know how the book was going, and that the end of the film, it really hinges on how is the book going for Shirley, like how was the process of writing it for her, and you wanted to feel like the wins and the losses. And so David had that idea to put in the voiceover of her hearing her write the book, and it wasn't actually in the script originally, and we added that, and Lizzie did such a beautiful performance, Elizabeth Moss did such a beautiful performance, and Sarah wrote those incredible passages, which are sort of like her version of Shirley's, like first drafts of Shirley's work. Yeah, so it was a real discovery process, and I think that helped so much because you could tell not only where Shirley was in relationship to the writing, but also where Shirley was in relationship to Rose, and how Rose was infusing Paula, like, and inspiring Paula. So I felt like it was an exciting thing to discover and to allow in the edit process.
Thanks so much, Josephine, for joining us today and for your wonderful film.
I'm so grateful and excited and so happy that it's playing with you, and thank you so much to the audience in Australia. I wish I was there to present this in person, and I'm just grateful that we get to do this. Thank you.
For the next film.
Yes, the next one. Awesome.
All right, thank you so much.
All right, thank you. All right, bye.